The age-old question. Where is the dividing line between upstate and downstate New York? Everyone has their opinions, or their strong lack of opinions, but I'll talk about the commonly proposed lines, and then I'll work through my logic as to what I think it is. First of all, it's safe to say, the people upstate and downstate don't completely love each other. There's a rivalry, for sure. People from upstate tend to think that the New York City area gets all the love and attention on a national scale, or even a global scale, although they usually turn around to say they like it that way, or that they like having fewer people. And then people from the New York City area think upstate is practically a rural wasteland, or at least nothing like the world they live in. And both sides complain about who funds who and who provides for whom and so on. Now, whenever I make a video about New York State, or reference upstate New York in any way, many people complain that I'm not sufficiently specific. Many people in Western New York don't like to think they're from upstate New York, claiming that it's different altogether. And instead, many commenters on this channel claim that upstate really only refers to this area. Now I, as do most sources, consider this to be the North Country region of New York, even though I've previously made a video about the North Country only north of the Adirondack region, and there are other sub-regions like the Thousand Islands. Considering the North Country to be the only true upstate New York is not a reasonable dividing line. The point of the upstate and downstate monikers is clearly to differentiate the New York City region from the rest of the state, and not to actually outline all the regions of the state. So, even with that parameter established, I'm sure many people wish the upstate-downstate line could look like this, just smack in the middle of the latitude, which would be about 42 3/4 degrees north. And I bet many would even like to exclude the part that juts out into New York City and Long Island, so that would move the center another 1/4 degree. But obviously, that doesn't represent the cultural divide whatsoever. Maybe you could argue that the Capital District is closer to downstate culturally than other regions, but that wouldn't apply to the Finger Lakes area or central New York, which would both be bisected by such a line. So instead, we need to make this line considerably more southerly. Remember, the population density near the city is unbelievably larger, so the area of each side should not be close to half and half. So the next option is the most obvious geometric answer to the problem, the extension of the southern tier line, or twin tier line for those in Pennsylvania, effectively the 42nd parallel. And that nearly matches up with the northern border of Connecticut, and you could arguably angle the line, or bend it at a point, like the Hudson River, to make it all meet up. And if we had to arbitrarily break the state into two new states legally, this might make sense. There are arbitrary borders in this world. But for this kind of conversation, it still simply doesn't make sense. While I pretty much agree that everything north of this line is considerably out of the downstate region, there is still a lot south of it that probably doesn't belong downstate, most notably a big chunk of the Catskill Mountains. It wouldn't make sense for some of it to be upstate and some of it to be downstate, considering how sparsely populated the whole region is. So before deciding how much further south to go for this dividing line, let's look at the opposite extreme opinions. People in New York City itself like to make the line way further south. There are people in Staten Island who consider anything not in Staten Island itself to be upstate, but that's just not reality. What's more common is for people in the city or in Long Island considering anything north of the city line to be upstate, except for Long Island. I, as well as most people, cannot agree with this opinion. First of all, there is no doubt that the New York City sphere of influence continues north, not just into Westchester County, but into a dense area that encompasses parts of New Jersey and Connecticut. Secondly, there are parts of eastern Long Island that go further north than the northernmost points of the city itself, so that would be a contradiction. And third, geometrically speaking, considering that there's an 11-mile narrow funnel that splits the city area from the rest of the state, due to the Connecticut Panhandle jutting in, there's really no way anything south of that should still be considered upstate. So now, let's go a little north to some more reasonable dividing line opinions. Now, for the record, I don't know anyone that uses the Connecticut Panhandle as a dividing line, and nor would I. And there are already enough debates as to what constitutes northern and southern Westchester County. But anyway, the next most logical idea is to include Westchester and Rockland counties in the downstate region, and to consider everything else as upstate. That's actually what the state government uses to determine the New York metro area for vehicle emissions inspections. Now, there are some nice things about this definition. First of all, on the Westchester side of the river, north of Peekskill, you don't have any major cities until Beacon, nearly 15 miles north. And Rockland County across the river is very densely populated, and then just abruptly stops near the northwest edge of the triangle. This is due to the Ramapo Mountains that cut the county off from neighboring Orange County. So by these standards, this division of upstate and downstate is arguably the best so far. There are just a few downsides to this though. First of all, most commuter trains go past these points. East of the Hudson River, along the river, they go as far north as Poughkeepsie, and inland, a little further north to the hamlet of Wassaic. On the west side, the Metro North Railroad goes as north as the Middletown area and as west as Port Jervis, the tri-point of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Then, while Putnam County is certainly not very densely populated, many of the suburban parts clearly feel like an extension to the northern Westchester towns of Yorktown and Somers. So we could amend this line by just making the Ramapo Mountains be the dividing line, from Suffern to, I guess, Pauling. But zoom out, and in my opinion, that's still too small of an area, compared to what we had earlier moving north to south. I'd say it's time to consider the arguments as to whether to include Orange and Dutchess counties in the downstate region. Okay, so although these mountains run for a few miles mostly uninhabited, right on the other side are some heavily populated parts of Orange County. You have the Woodbury, Monroe, Kiryas-Joel area, the Middletown area, and closer to the river, the Newburgh area, and all the suburbs therein. From Westchester, I feel like I used to always see Goshen on the weather maps, which is the county seat. Culturally, there are lots of people who move to this county from New York City, and although the overall density is lower, with some pockets between, it feels more like downstate than upstate, with a few more mountains in the background. And then, once we go across the river from Newburgh, you pretty much have a continuous suburban zone to the north between Beacon and Poughkeepsie, and that's probably where it should be cut off, right? Well, it's not that simple. There needs to be a geographic feature to clearly delineate the sides, as some arbitrary line won't work. We could use county lines, but that gets dicey too when some metro areas cross those lines, or if some geographic feature cuts it off. It's for this reason I don't want to use I-84 as the line either. So now, I will present my opinion as to the proper dividing line. I am for including the majority of Orange and Dutchess counties to downstate, and there is one geographic feature, at least west of the Hudson, where all forms of downstate absolutely come to an end. And it's this: the Shawangunk Mountains. Everything changes after this range. To the north, you have the Catskill Mountains, and to the west, the Allegheny Plateau. So by this logic, the far corner of downstate would be Port Jervis, which it's a little weird to include this downstate, but it's closer to Middletown than anything else. Then along the line would be Otisville and Bloomingburg, but the whole US 209 corridor would be on the upstate side. Now, the mountains mostly fade out when arriving at the New Paltz area, so there'd be a tough decision. We could cut it off there and draw a straight line east towards Poughkeepsie, but again, I'd like to be thorough and include the entirety of the geographic section. So for me, I'm continuing northeast to follow the Rondout Creek to the city of Kingston. Then we really do run out of real estate in anything that can be considered downstate. So my cutoff will be the Kingston-Rhinecliff Bridge, and then following Route 199, so I'll include the villages of Red Hook and Millerton. And this makes sense to me. Whenever I drive north to this area, I know I'm going considerably north, but not to a completely different world. But there's nothing north of these points that continue any metro areas, except for maybe Saugerties, but I'm sorry, that's just too far north. So now the geography resets, and everything along the river is rural for another 50 miles until Albany, with just the small city of Hudson in between. It's a compromise between the upstaters who want the line further north, and the downstaters who don't. Yes, there are open spaces, and even farmland between the Ramapo and Shawangunk ranges, but hey, there's some of that in Long Island too. So for the record, this definition puts some of Sullivan and Ulster counties in my downstate definition as well, but leaves slivers of Dutchess and Orange counties in upstate. So I'm sure most of you will disagree with me in some way, but I do hope this is the most methodical argument you've ever seen. I'd like to see your thoughts, including where my line should be or should have been, and your reasoning. Thank you for joining us on Explore the Northeast. We'll see you next time.